can have this feeling anytime you choose.
Hello again, it's your old friend Theta, the monotone messiah. One thing that a lot of people seem to miss is the fact that competitive environments demand a somewhat different approach to learning. Competitors need to take into account traditional learning methods, but they also need to be aware of the competitive dynamics that aren't talked about or taught explicitly very often. This is because the truly hard part of any competitive game is accounting for the other people involved. For 1v1 zero-sum games, you have to think about yourself and a single opponent. For team games, you have to account for not only your own play, but the play of both your team and your opponents. This means that training which focuses only on solo activity is not where competitors should be focusing the bulk of their attention. It makes sense to put all of your focus on your individual actions if you're learning to play violin, for example, but it doesn't make sense if you're getting ready to fight someone or play on a rugby team. The question of who to train with is then one of the utmost importance, because your training partners need to simulate whoever you'll be interacting with within your competitive space, either opponents or teammates. Coaches are often the people who get talked about the most, particularly in team games. That makes sense in many ways because a quality coach can make a world of difference for a team's culture. That being said, not everyone is in a position to work with a coach, and even a good coach can't save a training environment filled with poor training partners. And that's a problem, because as far as I can tell, how to pick training partners doesn't come up that frequently. Let's fix that, starting with a model derived from the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu belt system. In Jiu-Jitsu, there are 5 belt ranks, each one denoting a different level of skill and experience. Although every teacher and gym has their own standards, there are some rough guidelines that you can use to figure out who has what level of competence. White belts are the absolute beginners. You have a white belt on your first day in the gym, and you wear it until you reach the first promotable rank, blue belt. Blue belt in many cases just means slightly better than an absolute beginner. It's the belt rank that means you know a little bit, maybe enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be considered a regular threat to most higher belts. Purple is the competence rank, as this means you should have a grasp of the basics, and in many cases this is where people start to act as teachers. Then there are the expert ranks of brown and black belt, which are used to denote people who have a very high level of skill and experience. This hierarchy has generated its own culture of who spars, or rolls as we call it, with who during a given training session. For example, it's considered poor taste in many gyms for a black belt to pick a white belt and proceed to stomp them into the ground mercilessly. There's an expectation that a very good practitioner will give the new person a chance to try things and at least work a bit before the black belt inevitably taps them. The black belts run into partner selection problems because they are faced with the smallest pool of people who can put up a fight at their level. White belts have the largest pool of people who will roll with them, but their ability to win against most of them is limited. So what can players on both sides of the selection system tell us about how you can pick training partners? Let's start with the white belt side of the spectrum. If you're brand new, you have a training partner selection problem because, by default, everyone is more experienced than you. There's no sugarcoating how rough this stage can be. You're going to spend most of your early playtime getting styled on by those with more hours in the game than you. This is why new players have the highest churn rate. They play against people with gigantic experiential advantages and quit when they feel like they can't make progress. It's a tough situation, and many people decide to go find a new game to play as a result. But for those of you who want to get better, you need to come up with a better solution. A common first instinct is to say, I'm going to play with the absolute best. The thinking here makes sense on the surface because the idea is that these quality players will rub off on you somehow. While there is some value in doing that, more often than not, it's an ineffective, meathead way to train. It's not a good system because what it does, more than anything, is train you how to survive. It gears your whole game towards the defensive side and makes you play to not lose rather than play to win. And this isn't even getting into the problem of getting high-level people to play with you. A white belt will spend most of his time tapping when rolling with a black belt if the black belt is training for real. And if the black belt isn't training for real, then they're letting a lot of bad moves go unpunished. There is educational value to be had here, especially if the black belt is willing to walk them through their mistakes, but in general, only training with black belts means you'll always be on your back foot. This can't be viewed as acceptable because in zero-sum games, you should always be looking to impose your will on your opponent. They should be the ones reacting to you, not the other way around. If all you're doing is reacting, you are playing your opponent's game. This will not work out for you in competition. So what can a beginner do here? The best answer is to spend most of your time working with people near your skill level so you can get at least some quality offensive reps in. You will not be punished for every mistake, and at some point you will need to rewire your game, but it's necessary to go through this if only to get comfortable with the offensive, kill or be killed mindset required for real competition. It also gives the beginner room to experiment, make mistakes without severe consequences, and generally develop their own style of play. As you get better, you need to keep increasing the difficulty of your opponents. A good rule of thumb here is that your performances in training should be mediocre. Not terrible, but not incredible either. If you're killing it in every training session, chances are good that you aren't facing off against difficult enough opponents, and you're likely shielding your ego instead of trying to get better. If you're getting demolished every time you practice, you're being too far outclassed by your training partners, and it's a good idea to pick some slightly easier fights. Remember, it's okay to lose in training because you want to get your losing done in the training room rather than during a real competition. In many cases, losing is just a signal that you need to tighten something up. But losing too much can also be a signal that you're too far outside of your skill envelope, and that by itself can be another type of indicator that your ego needs to be put in check. This is the constant balance you need to figure out when picking training partners. Are they enough of a fight that they can punish you for mistakes, but not so much of a fight that you can't do anything constructive against them? The battle is always finding ways to stay mediocre during training. By doing this, you can be exceptional in competition. Skier Vince Pacente used to practice at a skill level above whatever he was competing at on purpose, specifically so competition would be easier and not require 100% effort. The emphasis here is on just a level above, not 20 levels above, and that's really what you should be shooting for in your training. What about practitioners on the expert side of the spectrum, the proverbial black belts of a game? Unlike white belts, they face a slightly different problem because they need to find training partners who can make them feel mediocre in the first place. The pool of experts is, by definition, pretty small. Black belts also have to deal with the fact that they have established habits and ways of doing things that can get stale or predictable, both of which are dangerous against good opponents. Other black belts can help them to some degree, but those players often have the same problem. They have an A game they lean on heavily, and it's hard to experiment without running into well-established autopilots on both sides of the equation. If they choose people who are too far outside of their skill level, they can get lazy and their game will stagnate further. So their partner selection problem is based on finding people who can give them enough of a fight to be a threat, but who are not so well entrenched in their ways that they won't get new ideas and techniques to play against. The solution many black belts have come up with is to spend a lot of time training with blue and purple belts. These are practitioners who know enough about the game to put up a good fight, punish some mistakes, and give the experts a variety of new looks, but are not strong enough players that the expert can't overpower them or recover if they find themselves in a bad position. In other words, what they're often doing is using weaker players as testbeds for their offense. It gives them the opportunity to put opponents in bad positions enough times to figure out all the small details of an attack sequence. If they were against people who are better or at the same level, they would not be able to get there very often or at all, which in turn means that they wouldn't develop the confidence and understanding needed to apply those tactics in competition. When they've had enough reps on their offensive sequences, they'll start to train more with other black belts who can put all of their learning to the test. They can figure out what about their new attack sequences need to be tweaked to work against expert level competition and refine their defense when their attacks fail. Back when I was a year into my blue belt, I started getting invited to competition training sessions for one of the black belts at the gym. At first, I thought I was getting invited because I was good, but I soon realized what was going on. I was basically competent enough to be a threat in certain situations, but mostly I was being put into defensive positions so the black belt could practice his various attack sequences on me. I was part of a group made up mostly of blue and purple belts, along with a few black belts. He'd always start with the lower belts and work his way to the black belts. It was obvious he was trying things out on us first, then trying to apply them on the other experts in the room. It's important to point out that there weren't any white belts involved. People at such an early stage of their development aren't that useful in those situations because they don't know enough to put up a good fight. Tap dancing all over new players isn't that informative no matter what game you play. So what's the overall model here? I'll break it down into 3 pieces. Number 1, pick training partners at or above your level to really put your skills to the test and refine your defense more than anything. If you're capable of executing your offense on these people, you're on the right path, but expect that you'll need to fall back on your defense more often than not, which is why I would say this is more of a defensive practice. Pick training partners below you for experimentation and offensive refinement. These are the people who will give you the reps you need to understand how to be intelligently aggressive. They will not punish you for mistakes as frequently, and you should be able to defend against their counterattacks if your offense fails. Number 3, as you move up in skill, you should be pushing yourself to train with people who will make you look mediocre. Winning and losing are both signals, and your ego will try to wrap itself around both of them. Don't be satisfied if you're stomping everyone, and don't think you automatically suck if you're getting stomped. It's all about picking good partners and practicing the right way based on the goals you're trying to accomplish. Lastly, don't think all of this applies only to 1v1 games like Jiu-Jitsu. It's equally important in team games. Make sure your teammates are on the same page and willing to go through this process of modulating who you train against. It's also important that your teammates are willing to push you to play like a real killer, as I've discussed in my previous videos. Well, that's all I've got for today. Tune in for the next episode of the How to Practice series, which should be out soon if it's not already out by the time you watch this. Do you have any experiences that relate to picking quality training partners? Leave them in the comments below. Until next time, this is Theta, signing off.